To a curious soul, experimentation is heaven. In my early days, I often found myself picking up tasks that would need a massive context switch. Maybe it was something about the freshness that attracted me. However, when I entered the corporate world, I realized that experimentation in business often means obsessing about the same boring stuff. And most people don't have in them the patience, the pace, or the ability to observe things granularly. All of these are traits that are very core to running an experimentation charter. And today we have someone who has, over a decade, gradually carved his path and is leading experimentation for probably one of the most used apps if you live in the West. Today with us, we have Siddharth Arora, the head of product analytics and experimentation at Yelp. Sid also founded JustAnotherPM, where product managers learn to get out of theory and applying principles into real world impacts. Sid has a glorious career and has handled retention and growth for Zomato, the product at RateGain, and has contributed in various capacities to organizations like American Express, Play Games, and SnapDeal. Welcome to the show, Sid. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Vikram. I'm good. How are you?
All good. Thank you so much. Super excited to talk about all things experimentation. There's so much in my mind. It's almost as if my younger version, which had like a lot of curiosities and was partly maybe ignorant, just wants to like sort of see the world through your eyes. But I have a question for you. First, I see on your profile you have pretty much gone through different corners of the world. You were in US, you were in Germany, you are in London now. So much of shift. Is there any place that wins? As in, like, what's been your favorite city so far?
Yeah, so I think favorite city is definitely actually let me choose a favorite country. I think it's been Germany. I was in Hamburg for about 3 years and absolutely loved my time there. It's I think the healthcare, the infrastructure, and in general, like Germans are very good with these things. But other than that, I've absolutely loved my time. In the US, it was I was studying, so it was when you're studying, you're in that mindset where it's more about just making friends and building your network and learning, etc. London is extremely kind of close to home. I just have more food options. I don't have a language barrier, which I had in Germany. So all of them have been very good. And then I'm from India, so there's no place like home. So I know that's not a good answer, but
No,
all
no,
the
no, no.
cities sound
Very, very
close.
well put. I spent time in Hamburg myself, so I know what you're referring to. And London, of course, feels a lot closer to India. I keep saying this to people that you'd not probably feel that you're in London. Plus, it's a beautiful city to take a walk in on any random day. But good to get your pulse on that. Sid, let's dive straight into some questions that I have for you. I have a bunch of them. Some of them are about how you have, in general, just gotten into the role you are. But first of all, I want to actually dive into the career trajectory shift that you saw, which is from being a product manager into leading experimentation as a charter. And I say that because I have myself spent a lot of time doing product, doing growth experiments. There's a lot of unlearning that a product manager needs to do. If you're a traditional product manager, you need to like become comfortable with the idea of not knowing what's going to work. Maybe you spend 9 months just actually trying things, nothing moves, you're experimenting and all the experiments have failed. How did that happen? Like, how did that shift happen? Was data playing a role into it? Can you just shed a light into how that transition happened for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two aspects to it. One of them you touched upon, which maybe I'll double click in just a second, which is more around, how do you unlearn and how do you learn. But I think the other one is more around that this specific role kind of was not necessarily like part of a plan. It was more around, an exciting opportunity came within Yelp. I was doing a very different role before I took over this role. And it just kind of made sense for two reasons. One, that it was purely data focused. And, I've just had a love for data for a while. Two, it was a challenge in the sense of it is an internal product. It is slightly more technical. It is a platform product, which is something that I had never done before, and I really wanted to kind of understand that aspect or that facet of product management. So that was aspect one. It kind of just happened at the right time, and I was excited. Going back to the first part of your question, this role specifically had a lot of unlearning for me, for the very reasons I spoke about, which are more around that. For most part of my life as a PM, I've been a feature PM, as they say it. Just using that term a little loosely, but I've been a PM who has some or very close interaction with the external world of the customers or the users. Which also means to some level that there is a good mix of customer slash business and technology. But when I transitioned into this role, things changed a little bit. It is an internal role, so all of my customers are internal to Yelp. But the mix between technology and customers is a little different. It's skewed a lot more towards technology, which basically forced me to change a lot of my mental models. A lot of my strategic discussions were now technical in nature, than business or customer oriented. So my personas or the people I'm working with now is very different. So that was
Yeah.
one aspect of unlearning, which kind of took me a while to get accustomed to. Second aspect was that being such a technical role, it kind of demanded that I I'm also getting in-depth understanding of the platform that I'm creating for my customers. So there was a large-ish learning period where I was just trying to understand what our platform does, how the stack works, what aspect of it do we do well versus what needs work, etc. I think those were the learning and the unlearning phases for me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Just CruncIt. Just CruncIt was conceptualized so that no one building for data and AI should feel left behind in today's world of ever evolving technology. Here we talk about all things data, analytics, business, experimentation, AI, and everything in between. Some very hard questions, some very honest answers. This is for you if you are an expert or just getting started. Wow. So I want to know one more thing here, and this may be related, may not be related, but I have a feeling there is a story behind how the thing that you do with product managers came up, and today you also have a decent following, right? Like you command a decent audience. 50,000 by no means is anything that I would consider insignificant. Was there ever an active effort on sort of like building that audience? And what's the story behind Just Another PM? Like it's a lot of shift, even in Zomato, which I know back when you were working, I was in India, the company was very aggressive in terms of its experimentation. And today, Yelp as well, you're leading the whole charter. American Express has been known as a company that itself is very, very, very particular in terms of how it handles products. There are at least certain verticals. My friends who are there at Amex, they share a lot of stories. SnapDeal. So there is like this sign of all of these companies which were at the prime of their journey. And by no means Zomato or Snapdeal are no longer at the prime of their journey, but they were experimenting very rapidly when you were there. You ended up launching Just Another PM. Is there a connecting thread behind all of it? Like how did you build that audience? How did things just happen over the years beyond experimentation as well?
So I think there is some connection, maybe positioned a little differently. So let me first, quickly talk about how Just Another PM came into being, and then where it is today, and then I'll kind of double click on the early rapid growth of the companies that I was part of. So around 2019, actually, when I made the move from India to Germany, a lot of people started reaching out to me to just understand two things. One is, hey, how do you transition from India to abroad, and how do you find these opportunities? But also, more importantly and broadly, about, hey, how do you excel as a product manager? Because everybody understands, to get opportunities, you need to be doing well at what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so 2019 and most of 2020 was more around me talking to these people, be it on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, etc., and trying to answer the same question over and over again. So it was at that point of time where I realized that, hey, you know what? It feels like there are just way too many people who might have the same question. Why not just start writing about it? So I started writing about it. That's when the blog, or let's say the formal content creation, came into being. Until that time, there was absolutely no effort or thought into building an audience or even sharing learnings. So 2020 until most of 21 and some part of 22, it was still kind of unstructured in the way, in the sense of that I knew, or I thought I knew, the questions that people have, and if I had answers to those questions, I just wanted to put it out in the world. So this is when I started to become super active on Twitter, LinkedIn, and continued my newsletter, and then it kind of slowly and gradually kept building. So that was the part of, like, let's say, the numbers growing, and the larger goal has always been like just trying to answer questions to which I have the answers but others might not, and they might appreciate it. The other funny story is that the name Just Another PM actually is something that I came up with in 2014, which is, at that point of time, I was not necessarily creating content, but I just wanted a handle where I actually felt like, hey, I'm just one of the 100 PMs, or 1,000 PMs in India who is kind of clueless, but very aspirational and ambitious and wants to grow and be successful. So I just, like, my mindset was that I'm just another PM today, but I don't want to be. So that's how the handle came into being. So
I love.
that's a little bit on, how the journey started, how it's been going. Today, it's a lot more formal, a lot more structured, in the sense of I put in a lot of thought and time into creating content, because now there are more people seeing it. So I don't want to share advice that's frivolous or that is not meaningful. Talking about this, the other aspect of the question, I absolutely, and you rightly pointed out, like both Snapdeal and Zomato specifically, I'm going to talk about them. Like they were the at a very very high growth phase when I was there, and like you also rightly called out, when you're at that scale and at that pace, experimentation becomes very very important. At that point of time, I didn't realize it. Right, I was running, especially at Zomato, I was running like 10 to 20 experiments every day, but I didn't necessarily sort of put things into context or how this would shape my career, etc. But yeah, those two experiences have had the maximum amount of learnings in my life and in shaping how I even today make decisions which are based on data, which are based on objective evidence, but also have some flavor of a person who's an expert in the space or some kind of product thinking brought into it.
Wow. I have a weird question for you here. I've never asked this to anyone, but so first of all, when you mentioned Just Another PM, this hits me very strongly because I remember back in the university when I joined in, there was someone who came and said that make sure that you are not just another roll number or not just another face in the crowd when you walk out of that. And after that, I have used that phrase in so many scenarios for myself, as in like today I'm building a company, so don't just be another founder and so on. So I thoroughly resonate with it, and I didn't know that was the story behind how just another PM came in. So I love it, first of all. But secondly, if you so a lot of what you said looks like it just happened. You were at Zomato, you were doing experiments, you moved, people started approaching you saying, hey, how did you move? And then you started answering those questions. But let's say I give you back 10 years today, right? Like you go back all the way to 2014. Would you plan things differently? Anything today, now that you look back on the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Maybe, yeah, let me focus on, let's say, the top two or three. So, the one thing that I strongly recommend a lot of product managers or people who ask me for advice even today is to get a mentor as early as possible in life, a professional mentor. And I kind of realized that even in 2014, but I didn't necessarily act on it. Like, the reason I realized it is because there were a lot of times in my typical day where I would be like, hey, these are the three things I can do. I think I should do A, but I don't know why, or I don't know why I shouldn't do B. So there were multiple instances where I couldn't validate if I'm making the right decisions, and I kind of needed guidance. But 2014 is also a period where product management in India was fairly naive and very, very, kind of finding its feet. So there were not too many experts. So even people who I was reporting into, they were seniors from my college, etc. They were really kind and always helpful, but even they were figuring out product management for themselves. So I think aspect number one is, even for myself, like if I were to go back to 2014, I'd actively look for a mentor. I didn't do that. I tried finding answers, but it didn't necessarily look for a mentor. The second thing that I recommend, and I would do it myself, is focus a lot on communication. I feel 90 to 95% of a job is communication. I say that very, very often on my channels. And I feel that communication is that one skill that if you don't have, you will really have a hard time as a growing as a PM. Everything else, be it product sense, be it data, be it relationship building, are things that you can build on, and you don't necessarily need to be a master at when you get into product management. The third thing is, which I made a lot of mistakes on, the aspect is that I was always in the fear of sharing opinions, or in the fear of making wrong decisions, and most importantly in the fear of asking for help. I always felt that asking for help is perceived as a sign of weakness, and what that meant in the real world for me is that I would be stressing inside, and fearing making decisions, but I would never ask for help. So I'd rather stress for 1 week, still go ahead and make a wrong decision and then suffer the consequences, rather than just asking my manager or people around me. So those are the three things that I even today recommend a lot of people should do, and they don't do it proactively. Some of them do it subconsciously. Like some people are just a little more open-minded and asking for help. They're comfortable making decisions, etc. But they have to be more proactive about it. And I think the one thing that took me a while to learn is being extremely curious is very, very important for product managers. Because even today, like I say this with a lot of confidence, that product management is not science, which basically means that 1 plus 1 is not always 2. And whenever you're in a space which is not science, it's also not completely art, it is important to keep challenging everything that you are doing, but also challenge what other people are asking you to do. And I didn't do that very, very actively. Like I was curious, but I didn't take the initiative to fulfill that curiosity. So just
Yeah.
to summarize, so if I were to do the last 10 years again, I would definitely focus a lot on my personal growth through a mentor, focus and double down on communication, which I think I did to some extent. Be extremely curious. Maybe also like invest in relationships. Like that's something that I didn't do, and super important for product managers.
Yeah, that's the last thing. The relationship bit is a personal regret of mine as well. Specifically now that I'm building a company, when you are trying to distribute the product, and I have been in rooms with CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, numerous of them through the roles that I was in previous companies, previous organizations, trying to pitch products, things that you would not aspire or like not hope for, or would not come to you as a young person in that job. And I was fortunate that way, but I never really materialized on that, and that's been a personal sort of regret for me as well. Couldn't agree more on the communication framework, and for that matter, all the product managers listening in today or aspiring product managers, you know what you should be focusing on. But I think it was put very nicely. This was not long back, like 2 3 days back, I was reading somewhere, and it, it was explained that hey, you may be a 10 on 10 when it comes to, let's say, writing code, or you may be 10 on 10 when it comes to doing product management, but if you are 2 on 10 in communicating the code you rate, or 2 on 10 on communicating what the work that you did cumulatively for the world, you would always be 2 on 10. You would never be 10 on 10, right? Like, so that I completely resonate with that. But Sid, I have a question for you I want to double down on, because a lot of people will still get confused about it. When you say mentors, what does a mentor do? Like, what is a typical mentor going to help you with? Who is could you differentiate between a mentor and a coach as well, because these terms get floated around very loosely, and maybe someone in here is like actually thinking about how it differs.
Yeah, so let me try to answer or double down a little bit on mentorship, the way I see it, and then maybe we'll try to draw differences between coaching. So mentorship, especially personal mentorship, in my mind means that there is a person who helps you understand and make the right decisions that will help your career grow, and it'll help you stand out from your peers. Um, it'll help you be a better professional. So while you're living your professional journey, at any given point of time you're making decisions. It could be fairly minor in terms of, hey, what do I how do I do this presentation tomorrow, or it could be fairly major. Should I accept a job in Germany versus stay in India, or should I accept job A versus B? But all of these decisions have some impact on how your career and your journey takes shape in the longer term. But you living in that moment can't necessarily see that long term, and that is where a
Mhm.
mentor comes in and helps you not necessarily make the decision for you, but gives you that perspective of, while you're considering or while you're making this decision, think of these three factors, or use this kind of mental model. You can also now translate this into more tactical things where, let's say a product manager is going through a very critical project and they're stuck on a specific aspect, let's say user research, and they're unable to make progress. And if this person were to ask their mentor, they could probably help. But I think the other aspect of it is that typically a lot of people, when they think of mentors, they start creating this celebrity kind of an image of, I want, a mentor would be somebody who's fairly popular and whatnot. But that's not necessary. In my mind, the only condition that's necessary is that this person should be maybe 2 to 5 years ahead of me, but on a similar journey path. So this person would have done 3 years ago what I'm doing today, and hence their insight will be very, very meaningful. So that's what I mean largely by mentorship. I
Got it.
don't know if, like, I don't know, how to necessarily differentiate it from coaching. I agree the two terms are thrown very loosely. Coaching could be a little more generic. I feel like I associate coaching with more like, hey, today we have an expert coming in to the office and he or she is going to help us understand how agile is done. So it could be a little lesser personal, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
No, yeah, coaching. So first of all, everyone has a very fluid definition of what's coaching and what's mentorship. But
Yeah,
for me, I have had mentors and I have had coaches. And for mentors, the one very clear cut difference that I have seen is that they are way more granularly involved. As
yeah,
in, like, mentors can talk about a particular project. Coaches talk at a very high level, on a very high level overview. And they're both equally effective. Like, I can't go
yeah,
to a coach who's teaching me how to handle my, let's say, relationship with my investors better, or a coach that is actually just trying to teach me to be a better leader. They will keep talking about these principles and these stories and these examples, but sometimes when you are like actually stuck in the nuances of a product, you need someone who is not like too distant from it. Coaches can be people who are 20, 25 years senior to you, 40 years senior to you, who have scaled big companies, because what they're talking about is fundamentally correct. Mentors are best if they are people who are not too senior, or who are at least not too distant from what you are dealing with. So it could be someone who's like maybe 5 years, 10 years ahead in
yeah,
career compared to you, but they know what it means. So for example, someone is doing AI and product management. A mentor who has not seen or has not played with, let's say, LLM, they're at best not going to be able to guide the person who's actually seeking mentorship as well. So that's one thing I see, but I hear you loud and clear as well on whatever you mentioned. Sid, I actually want to switch gears here
mhm,
into going into something much more relevant to our audience here. And our audience is largely data folks, right? Like, so we, on the outside, anyone who's actually just trying to understand how these companies work with data, here is like a broader framework. It may not be exactly the framework that everyone uses, but I've seen that these companies that are massive, they have a data lake, they have maybe these data warehouses, you have these business terms being floated in, there are these different experimentation charters being led in. Someone has to do that analysis of, okay, when Vikram says revenue, what does Vikram actually mean? And then on top, there is all of this analysis that you need to do with the context that you can only have if you have spent time in the business. So too many granularities, you need to like remove data that is noisy. At best, you can like do approximations in certain scenarios and so on. Now this is all very complex. Like, it's a lot of like, which is why data as a domain is probably one of the most expensive things for companies, even in terms of like saving cost or server costs and so on. Data is where there is like most energy being spent by companies. These teams that grow into series C or later stage, they end up hiring 20 data analysts, 15 data analysts. There are all sorts of tools, all of them are growing fine. But somewhere still in my conversation with people, I realize that this term that my data analysts can have superpowers is still not used, right? Like, everyone feels that they're still going the old school route. They're not up to date. There are these friction points. As you have scaled your products, as you have worked in different roles, right from your very early on in the career when you were doing your own data analysis to today where you may have a bunch of analysts handling experimentation or data science folks handling experimentation for you. What do you think is like largely missing in the whole journey? Is there anything that is still largely a pain point? Is there anything that you would solve which would somehow end up being a superpower for people who are helping you with your analysis, with your experiments?
Yeah, I think there are multiple aspects to just working with data. Before I
Yeah,
actually answer, the core of your question. So I feel I feel there are two sides to data, right? There is a data producer, and then there is a data consumer, and a person who kind of enables data. So let's say my role or my team's role needs to be very very well aligned on both sides, which basically means that this person needs to have a deep understanding on both sides. Now, when you look at the data production side, then there are a lot of things happening where you start with: are you capturing slash logging the right data? Are you storing it correctly? Are you transforming it the right way? And then, like you said, kind of surfacing it in the right way. From the consumer perspective, you asked a very relevant question of um, if a certain team talks about revenue, is that the same definition that team B also has? And
yeah,
how do we ensure that when team C starts using that data point, they also understand? So in my mind, that's how I like to break it down, where the person or the team who's enabling data kind of has to go extremely deep in understanding both sides. Here, on the consumer side, you're trying to understand the need of the hour, and then on the producer side, or let's say even on the data platform side, you're trying to understand the capabilities of, can we even cater to this requirement? Hence, deep understanding is required. Coming to your question, if the larger challenge or an aspired for superpower right now, it depends on the organization, right? So what I mean by that is, if you're a smaller organization or a startup, you're kind of flexible in the sense of the amount and quantum of data is lesser. So all of these checks around, I think you mentioned a few things like quality or accuracy or reliability are lesser. You don't have a lot of issues or things going wrong with data. Also, the decisions that are made are, in startups, they're kind of somewhere in between data plus gut plus product mindset,
yeah,
whatnot. But when you translate this into a large organization or a more mature organization, then the focus changes a lot, right? Then you will spend a lot of time ensuring that your data is accurate, because the decision that you're going to make based on that will have an impact of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Um, so here, the superpower or the focus is that how do you ensure that you're making data available, which is accurate, reliable, easily accessible at scale without a lot of overheads in terms of processes, right? And I'll also double click on that. That's where, let's say, the data analysis comes in, or the analysts come in, etc. Here, in the smaller companies, the focus is more on speed. So you're okay living with a higher margin of error as long as you have quicker access and you're able to make quicker decisions. Yeah, so I think the superpowers will be very different. So here it's speed, here it's quality and accuracy.
yeah,
um, and it's not that quality and accuracy doesn't exist. The only challenge is that to ensure quality and accuracy, it just takes a longer time.
yeah,
So that is where, a lot of these, I would say, people-based roles come in, where one, the data is so vast or
mhm,
complex that an end user might not be able to consume it on their system. Like, they might not even have the computing power to look at millions of rows of data.
yeah,
That is where you might have analytics tools, or you might get support from experts like data analysts and data scientists. So
mm,
yeah, I think, just to summarize, I think the aspect of focus is, how do you at scale ensure that you are providing the highest quality of data to your
yeah.
consumers, so that they don't make, or so that they make the best decision possible.
Got it. Let's say someone has solved for it. And I have a follow up question here. You mentioned the economical impact of the decisions that you're making, which could go all the way into millions. Now, let's say the data quality is taken care of, and it's easier said than done. There are a bunch of products out there. There are all sorts of offering. We ourselves have a semantic map that sort of like helps you have reliable dashboards and reliable data points. But there's still these granularities that come into the picture. It takes effort. But let's assume that all of that is done. Even then, one question where I see struggling, like where most of the data leaders also struggle today, data heads, and I won't name anyone, but I have spoken to like a lot of renowned companies, their data heads, public companies. What I always feel is that there's no clarity around how is ROI being measured in terms of like 20 analysts spending 10 hours, let's say per day, that's 200 hours, 8 hours per day, that's 160 hours. If I make them 50% as efficient, what does that really map to? Like, how do you map the effort or the ROI that you are actually based on whatever you are doing? How is that ROI being mapped? How do you calculate it today? For example, you're paying someone a salary. How are you calculating whether their effort is actually leading to it or not? Because a lot of these experiments sometimes go nowhere. And this is a personal question I have as well. Like, I have been in a spot where I have managed teams of 10 people. We've learned a lot of things, but as an org, we have not really moved anywhere in the past. And as that has happened, you end up questioning yourself in terms of, oh, does it even make sense? Like, what if I just don't have these 5 people in my team, and so on? So do you have any like things to add in terms of how should people think about mapping the ROI, or is there a concrete way of defining it? How does Siddharth do it today?
Yeah, I think in general, like the short answer is it's tough. The
Yeah.
long answer is that it is tough right now because only very recently have bigger companies started to focus on data as an asset rather than as a liability. Actually, data is never a liability, but when you start thinking of your server cost, and when you start thinking of all the third-party tools that you buy to support your data, or like you said, all the people you have on your team to help you support data needs, people have traditionally thought of data as a cost to the company, and it's very difficult for leadership to identify, like you said, the ROI of it, or the impact, or sorry, the return aspect of it. So in general, there are two methodologies that have worked in my past. One is that having this conversation with critical decision makers proactively and candidly of saying that, hey, you know what, data enables a lot of other things which are extremely critical to our business, and if we are to keep enabling that, then this is the amount of resources slash people slash bandwidth we need. Um, and then we kind of just agree that, hey, you know what, 2023 or 2024, these are the number of people, and this is like the budget to buy tools that you have. Let's just make the best of it. So that's one way where you kind of just agree on what's required. Obviously there is some to and fro negotiation, etc. The second aspect, which I feel is the more truer one, and is the right one, which I think will take at least another 5 7 maybe 10 years to kind of start getting internalized, is um, on a unit level trying to identify the ROI, right? The unit here doesn't necessarily need to be a person or a piece of technology or a piece of tool, but understanding what your data infrastructure today is enabling, and then translating this into some kind of an objective measure, be it revenue or be it impact or be it the value it creates for users. And I, like, in my experience, some of that has started happening. So what that means is, let's say if my universe of data has 10 different units of input, I'm
Hmm.
able to identify impact for 2 of them today, and for the 8 of them it's still fuzzy.
Hmm. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so the message here is that you need to kind of break it down a couple of levels further to identify which ones can be easily and directly translated into something that is more measurable, versus which ones are fuzzy. And for the ones that are fuzzy, you just need to help everybody understand, hey, this is fuzzy and it will be for a while, but it is critical for so and so reason. So I think it just kind of boils down to, as the head of data, how do you help all of the execs and the C-suite see the relevance and the importance of having that infrastructure?
Got it. And does it change in any way with the, let's say, introduction of generative AI? Because again, all of these orgs that I was mentioning, all of these data leaders, there is this common sense of being left behind. And I see the logic or the rationale behind it as well. Like when cloud came up as a technology, it was okay for you to adopt slowly. With AI, it looks like what was okay to adopt over 10 years may not be okay anymore to do over 10 years. Maybe you have to do that over 2 years or 3 years. And in general, if an org is massive, it's a Herculean task, like months and months and months of efforts of like just streamlining things. And then there is in general a clarity, in general, a lack of clarity for that matter as well around what is happening, where is the data going, how secure is it, and so on. So while you are pressured, you still have a lot of unknown answers. And on top, all of this ambiguity that we were just talking about, what's your take on that? Like for that matter, like if a leader of a big company is thinking about how they should transition from being like from this feeling of being left behind to having AI as something that they can leverage, what should be the right approach?
I mean, yeah, I think a TLDR answer to that is the focus and the perception and the importance of data has now just been amplified. It's kind of, if let's say this new Gen I revolution hadn't happened in 2022 or whenever, maybe it would have taken another 5 to 7 years for everybody in the company coherently agreeing on the power and value of the data and infrastructure supporting the data. Today that understanding exists, but it still exists from a very consumer mindset, which basically means that if a company or a product team or a team is trying to leverage Gen AI or AI in general, that will enable new use cases, or that will enable more revenue or more customers, then it still becomes a talking point, because then the question is, hey, if we need to do this for our customers using LLMs or whatever, what do we need? And then those data needs become important, because now they're directly supporting some objective or some goal. So yes, so the importance has increased, but it is very use case based, right? If
Got
your organization is using Gen AI or AI in general for a use case that enables net positive revenue or net positive customer or retention or any of these critical metrics, then you start seeing leaders being excited about it, and then you start seeing them being a little more open in investing into it.
have you used it? Like has it been fruitful in your personal experience?
Um, I mean, to a little extent, yes. I've been experimenting a lot for multiple different aspects. My primary, like on the personal front, my primary use case is content. Um, so yes, to some extent, just generating ideas, etc. But still not to the level that I'd like it to. So I've also been exploring, can I kind of automate some of the work that I do that doesn't necessarily need all the time. At the same time, there's Yelp is investing a lot into it. I think very recently we made a couple of announcements. We have a lot of data and we have a lot of rich data. So how do we use that to just help make the lives of our users better, or help make the lives of our customers, like the paying customers, better? So there's definitely a lot of learning. There's definitely risks involved, like you said, privacy of data and security of data, etc. So still in the learning phase, I think, on both ends, personal and professional.
Got it. I'll keep an eye out on how that learning evolves. Whenever you have that clarity, please share it with us. So that you work with a lot of product managers. We are talking about AI, tech, experimentation. These are terminologies that still more than half of the product fraternity is still not comfortable with. Even the idea of experimentation in established companies as well. Experimentation is not something that comes out naturally. It like even the leaders in there, it just is like a lot of friction. People prefer going by the gut instinct, and if you for whatever reason have seen success the traditional enterprise way where relationships are key, and they're still important, relationships are important, but specifically in enterprise companies experimentation takes a backseat. Amongst with all of that context, on top of all the things that we have discussed, more and more people today are trying to build their own things. More and more people are coming into the domain of product management. AI is booming up. We don't even know what all is going to be possible. Like OpenAI did a whole bunch of things with their Sora AI, like video creation, and it's taking the world. Like everyone is gasping through, wow, how is this even possible? So is there anything in general that you are very bullish on or very excited about, be it related to the movement of people, more people trying to do something, be it related to tech in general, anything?
Um, yes, I think let me break that down into two parts. So first, let's talk a little bit about experimentation. I think you bring out a good point in terms of enterprise orgs usually have a tough time, but I think there is even a larger point here where people struggle with the definition, the value, and the meaning of experimentation. And in my mind, like if I were to explain this to a layperson, the way I would do it is that, hey, every time you're trying to make a decision that has dire consequences, you want to ensure that you are making the right one. And what if I tell you that there is a way that between A and B you could choose, let's say A, put it into the real world only for a small duration, only for a small number of people, and see how they react. Um, that's one way to look at experimentation, where every time you have a trade-off to make and it has high upsides and high downsides, you can limit that and learn from it. The other way, which is not necessarily a layman explanation, is more around every time there is a question with multiple answers. Experimentation usually is the right way to find the right one, find the right answer with the lowest amount of cost and the lowest amount of impact. And companies or teams that usually are part of, or that cater or create products to millions of users, they understand that a wrong decision or a wrong release or a wrong feature or a wrong user experience will have a lot of downsides to it. You'd start losing customers, you'd start getting bad press, etc. So that's how I look at it. Now, when you think of enterprises, I feel that there are other challenges on top of the lack of understanding or the value of experimentation, and those challenges are that, one, you don't have tens of thousands of customers to experiment with.
Yeah.
A lot of your product releases and features are they have longer cycles. Like you'd make one new feature in 3 months, 6 months, etc. Whereas in the B2C world, things are happening every week. That's why you will see an Uber or an Airbnb running experiments every day. And the other aspect of enterprise is also that you have lesser users, hence you have lesser feedback to learn from. So even if you were to run an experiment, will you actually get enough data to statistically say that the experiment was a success or a failure? With
Yeah.
that said, in my mind, like I worked not necessarily in enterprise space, but when I was at RateGain, which is a purely B2B company, I was creating products for hotels, and I could never do systematic or productized experimentation there. But what I would do is I would have these conversations with multiple customers and then just pose it as a question of, hey, this is what we're thinking to do, A or B, what do you think will be good? And then still use that information to, when I would, let's say, if all of my 10 customers say A looks good, I would still make it more like a phased launch. So I'm not releasing this to 20,000 of my customers at the same time, but it's only going out to 1,000. So the point I'm trying to bring out is that there is experimentation that's also happening in the B2B or in the enterprise space, but I think the
Yeah.
channels are very different. They don't happen at scale like they would at Zomato or Uber.
Got it. Wow, I have tons of thoughts in my head because I have spent most of my time doing analysis and experimentation and trying to like bring the idea of growth through all the traditional verticals that you can think of: acquisition, adoption, and so on. Because even enterprises that I have worked with, they have always tried at least having a self-serve motion, and I think that's partly like something that I feel is going to become more and more mainstream, like PLG or all of these terminologies that you keep seeing, as long as it like is not sort of deviating people from their core focus areas. I would be very keen on seeing how PLG overall evolves.
Yeah.
But so that any learning as we wrap up here, any learning that you have had which you'd like to share with people, and on a closing note as well, how can someone reach out to you?
Yeah, I think so. Learning on the experimentation side, I'm kind of going to double click on your last question. I feel that it is extremely important for product managers or even larger teams to understand the importance of it and then make an educated decision of either investing into it because it is valuable or not investing into it because we can't do it at scale and hence it doesn't get us all the value. Because experimentation in itself comes with a lot of infrastructure and cost and learning and whatnot. And once you made that decision, then it is really important to drive that culture, which is the second point of failure when it comes to experimentation, where people believe in the power of it but they don't do it in the right way. They do it for the heck of it. So just building the right culture, kind of ensuring people have the freedom to create these aggressive and open-ended hypotheses and then have the ability to test it. So I think that's learning one. Learning two is, every time it comes to data, I try to help people appreciate, especially the ones who are in bigger orgs, just understanding the complexity of one data point being logged on the mobile app and that then surfacing into a beautiful dashboard which has another million data points. There is a huge journey which involves a lot of people, a lot of skill, a lot of infrastructure. Hence it's not easy.
Yeah,
And I think the third one is going to be very similar to the three or four learnings that we spoke about earlier. That even today I focus a lot on my communication. I focus a lot, like I force myself to be curious. I found myself to be, with time and experience, there are times where I'm consciously taking a back seat and not being as curious as I should be. So just being curious and just being aware. Like it's really important for product managers, irrespective of what field, just to be very very up to date with what's happening in the world, because that's where, like, believe it or not, I feel that anywhere between 70 to 90% of all of the product ideas that come or that happen are from the world around you. There's
yeah.
only 10% ideas that are net new or visionary or that nobody has thought of. I think those are the three learnings. Getting in touch with me is fairly easy. I'm very active on Twitter. My handle is just another PM. Very active on LinkedIn. Yeah, those are the two best ways.
Awesome. So that I can't thank you enough for doing this. I had a lot of fun chatting, and every time when I'm nearing the end of an episode, I try thinking about if there's one phrase I could like summarize the episode with. And I think like this one is very close to being raw, as in like we chatted very fluidly about things that I have never, for example, gone on record and said that, hey, enterprises, like even though I may have said it in closed room, enterprises have a really bad experimentation culture. I may have said it in common groups as well, but never on record. So I loved it. Thank you so much. I had a very, very, very good time talking to you.
Same here, Vikram. Thank you. This is a fun discussion.
Awesome. And folks, if you're listening in, we have a whole lot of new episodes coming in as well. Please show some love. Let us know what you think about it. And if there's anyone else you'd like to see on this road, please let me know in the comments. Thank you. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.